This is A Word, a podcast from Slate. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. Republicans have just finished their national convention in Milwaukee after a turbulent week of news outside its halls. And while some people of color were featured on stage, what does the party of Donald Trump really have to offer African Americans?
If you're serious about issues that are impacting a young black man today, you don't offer up gold lame sneakers.
Michael Steele on the Republican convention and the state of the White House race. Coming up on A Word with me, Jason Johnson. Stay with us.
Pulling up to Mickey D's just for drinks? Oh yeah, that's me. Nothing extra, just perfection and a straw. Coming in hot for the coldest cups on the block. Because there are drinks. Then there are drinks from McDonald's.
Mix things up with any size lemonade or sweet tea for $1.49. Perfect with our classic fries. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome to A Word, a podcast about race and politics and everything else. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. Former President Donald Trump is now officially the nominee of the Republican Party for the White House, and especially for a rematch between two well-known candidates. The 2024 campaign has become volatile and violent, with Trump surviving an assassination attempt last weekend and President Joe Biden enduring public calls from his own party to step down. As for black voters, Trump continues to tout outreach efforts, and some polls suggest that he's making inroads with black men, maybe. But what does the former president really have to offer African Americans? And what is the reality beyond the noise about this campaign in the media? Joining us to talk about it all is political analyst Michael Steele. He's the ex-chair of the Republican National Committee and the former lieutenant governor of Maryland. He currently hosts the Michael Steele podcast and The Weekend on MSNBC. Michael Steele, one of my favorite people. Welcome to A Word.
Hey, man, it's so good to see you and be in your house.
I have to ask you this. We're at the Republican convention this week. Just by energy and attitude and beliefs, how is this convention week different than previous convention weeks? Like just from the people you've talked to who are there, like how does this one differ?
That's a good question. I think first off, you've got to keep in mind the context of the Butler shooting and how that on the Saturday before the launch of the convention on Monday really shaped how narratives would be played out. The word going out from the RNC to the speakers, don't change your scripts. We don't want to really talk about what happened in that vein. Certainly don't want to level up the noise that we've heard from various individuals coming into this about whose fault this was and what we know and didn't know about the shooter at the time when the convention was starting. So in that sense, it's sort of like putting, a wrapping over a microphone. You still hear the sound, but it's a little muffled, right? It's a little bit different. And I think that's really kind of what the convention itself started out as. Now, when you get through the rest of the process and how that plays itself out, those storylines, evolve and they change. But the reality of it is this convention is different starting with that point. But then even more so, Jason, you layer in the fact that you have a nominee who is a 34-time convicted felon, twice impeached, serial sexual predator, convicted of fraud going in excess of $500 million. And the RNC and the Republican Party is like, yeah, that's our guy. We're gonna roll with Skippy, and that is very different from any convention that, and I've been going to every convention since 1982, that you sit back and go, damn, this is not the Republican Party. And I think in the main, that's what you come to. That's the conclusion you come to. This is no longer the Republican Party. That moniker Republican means nothing. MAGA is it. And that's what this is. This is the MAGA Party. You can call it the Trump Party. You can call it the Trump National Committee. You can call it the MAGA National Committee, but it is a long way removed from republicanism. And that was the point.
We also got hit with, and this this very much resonated with me as a former Ohio resident. Trump picks JD Vance, Senator JD Vance, junior senator from Ohio, as his VP pick.
I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. A small town where people spoke their minds, built with their hands, and loved their God, their family, their community, and their country with their whole hearts. But it was also a place that had been cast aside and forgotten by America's ruling class in Washington.
What was your first reaction to him picking Vance, which to me is, it's an inconsequential pick. I don't think it has any bearing on what happens in the election, but it speaks volumes about where Trump is and what his hold is on the organization.
From a political strategist perspective, I think it was not a good pick because it exposed Trump to a lot of conversation and narratives that they're now going to have to defend against, which has already started with his choice calling him the American Hitler, 6-7 years ago. And that was just one of a string of things that JD Vance said about Donald Trump. I thought that a woman would have been a smarter pick, an Elise Stefanik, would have consolidated the congressional heft that Donald Trump could take advantage of, but also give him the narrative on abortion. He's picked someone whose views on abortion are extreme in the context of Roe versus Wade and the Dobbs decision, where JD Vance has argued that under no circumstances should a woman be allowed to have an abortion. And let me repeat, under no circumstances, her life, a rape, or an instance of incest, where a child is conceived, should she have the option to consider whether or not that traumatic experience should result in the birth of a child. And so with that now part of the narrative, it makes the conversation on abortion hardened against the GOP. It will require candidates running in congressional districts and Senate races to now have to deal with that. So there are a lot of ramifications politically and from a policy perspective that JD Vance's selection will trigger for this ticket. To your important point, in the main, it means nothing. I mean, Donald Trump is not picking someone to help him. Donald Trump picks someone he can control. Donald Trump picks someone who, when he says to him, go implement Project 2025 and don't screw it up, Project 2025 will get implemented because he has the brain power and the skill sets that Donald Trump doesn't have to do that, because Donald Trump largely doesn't care. He has not read Project 2025. In one sense, he's correct when he says, I don't know anything about it. But then he's also lying because all of 125 people of the folks involved in it were his people. And so there are these aspects of this where JD Vance represents the MAGAification, the complete MAGAification of the GOP. And this is no longer than the Republican Party. It is Trump's party. This is the Trump National Committee, not the Republican National Committee. So it's not so much about picking an heir to carry on the legacy of Trump, because Trump is not about legacy. He's got two sons, and he do you want to get a sense of what Donald Trump thinks about legacy? Look at how he treats his boys. So Trump doesn't care about legacy in that sense. But what I think JD Vance does for him is solidifies the MAGA hold, to tell the MAGA base, we need you to turn out. This is a turnout pick for him. And then when they win, he's got someone who can, from a legislative standpoint, oversee the implementation within that 180-day plan that they have. And folks should really pay attention to what that 180-day plan is and what it says. A big portion of it is Project 2025. You don't have to read the whole 900 pages. There are a lot of digests of what this is. There are aspects of this that we can't lose sight of. And the bottom line is this. The individual who unfortunately was attacked by a gunman is still the same guy who wants to be a dictator, period. Full stop. And the nominee of the Democratic Party, the only knock against him is he's 81 years old. So y'all just need to shut the hell up and get behind the 81-year-old.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more on Black Republican leadership and outreach to Black voters with Michael Steele. It's The Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. Explore the biggest political corruption scheme in U.S. history in the latest season of the Wondery podcast, American Scandal, Teapot Dome. Using vivid and immersive storytelling, American Scandal retraces the bribes, players, and underhanded deals of the Teapot Dome scandal. In 1922, newspapers reported that Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall had leased federally owned oil reserves to two of the nation's wealthiest oil barons, Edward Doheny and Harry Sinclair. Fall had made the deals to enrich himself, and all three men were charged with defrauding the U.S. government. The scandal, named after one of the oil reserves in Wyoming, would eventually send Sinclair to prison for contempt of Congress and jury tampering. This made Fall the first person ever convicted of a crime committed while serving in the U.S. cabinet. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge this season, American Scandal Teapot Dome, early and ad-free right now on Wondery Plus. Go deeper and get more to the story with Wondery's top history podcasts, including American History Tellers, Legacy, and even The Royals. Explore the biggest political corruption scheme in U.S. history in the latest season of the Wondery podcast, American Scandal, Teapot Dome. Using vivid and immersive storytelling, American Scandal retraces the bribes, players, and underhanded deals of the Teapot Dome scandal. In 1922, newspapers reported that Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall had leased federally owned oil reserves to two of the nation's wealthiest oil barons, Edward Doheny and Harry Sinclair. Fall had made the deals to enrich himself, and all three men were charged with defrauding the U.S. government. The scandal, named after one of the oil reserves in Wyoming, would eventually send Sinclair to prison for contempt of Congress and jury tampering. This made Fall the first person ever convicted of a crime committed while serving in the U.S. cabinet. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge this season, American Scandal Teapot Dome, early and ad-free right now on Wondery Plus. Go deeper and get more to the story with Wondery's top history podcasts, including American History Tellers, Legacy, and even The Royals. This is Jason Johnson, host of A Word, Slate's podcast about race and politics and everything else. I want to take a moment to welcome our new listeners. If you've discovered A Word and like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And let us know what you think by writing us at aword@slate.com. Thank you. You're listening to Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're talking about Black Republicans and Black voters with former RNC Chair Michael Steele. So, Michael, there's this concerted effort to put out people like Tim Scott. His name was flirted as a VP pick. What do you think of the Republican Party's current attempts to sort of curry favor with Black voters, whether it's hinting that 50 Cent would perform, getting certain random rappers, Tim Scott's speech? Do you think any of this actually works with Black people at all? Because I know this is a far cry from the sincere attempts that you made 10, 12 years ago.
This is not a serious effort, people. Stop it. It just isn't. If you're serious about issues that are impacting a young Black man today, you don't offer up gold lame sneakers. If you're concerned about what's happening in the Black community relative to education, which translates into lack of job opportunities, which fosters further poverty, which then leads to crime, your solution isn't, we're going to protect your access to menthol cigarettes. You don't then say, I want to sit down and have a, quote, barbershop conversation. You and I have done barbershops. We know what a real live barbershop conversation is. Well, number one, you come into my community, you don't import Black people to sit in a barber chair from another state who don't know what's going on in my community. I'm sorry. Byron Donald from Florida can't come to Maryland and sit in a barbershop in Baltimore and talk shit about what's going on in my neighborhood. Just doesn't work like that. Now, Byron can come in and be a part of a conversation where we impart to him what it's like since you representing Donald Trump. But you don't come in and own the conversation. Oh, and by the way, you then don't have Donald Trump call in? Who calls into a barbershop? It makes no sense. This tells you the level of seriousness. So don't trot out to me, Black men are gravitating towards Donald Trump. Okay, fine. But that doesn't tell you where the Black community is. And don't give me all these crazy ass statistics about, it was 9%, now it's 20%. The reality of it is you've offered me nothing. You've told me nothing. You've said nothing. And you can go back and Trump can point to, yes, they put money into HBCUs and they trotted out Tim Scott to lay out some, yet another, affirmative action program in the Black community. But what is that translated into? I went back and looked at some of the statistics. Ivanka Trump did better under that Donald Trump plan than Black businesses did under Tim Scott's plan. So I just, I think we need to be serious. And I think the Black community, and you see this starting to emerge, and you've been very clear in this space of advocacy about Black folks leveraging our power against both political parties and making them work for the vote, and making them understand that, this is no booty call, right? Where you just kind of show up whenever you want to and get what you want and then leave. That's not how this works. And we as a community need to understand that. And we as a Black community need to leverage that and leverage against these parties if we want to see improvement in how our kids are educated and resources are distributed to them within our community. Taking the boards off of the buildings in our neighborhoods and bringing in sustainable businesses and opportunities and keeping in place the families that are there. I don't need you to gentrify my community without me. I need you to gentrify it with me in it, with more Black businesses and entrepreneurs having a stake in this, as opposed to, shipping in once white folks figured out, oh, okay, now's the time to put the Starbucks in here.
I want to talk a little bit about a speech that we saw at the RNC. We referred to Tim Scott's speech, which was, America's not a racist country, which is just insanity and shenanigans. But I wanted to highlight a speech by Amber Rose.
I realize Donald Trump and his supporters don't care if you're Black, white, gay, or straight. It's all love. And that's when it hit me. These are my people. This is where I belong.
For those of you who don't know who Amber Rose is, right? Like, she got famous on BET reality shows. She was a model. She was with Kanye for a while and Wiz Khalifa, who was a rapper out of Pittsburgh and everything else like that. Michael, this is my question for you. First off, because of her actual reputation on reality TV shows and everything else ain't Black folk really listen to her. But I want you to take me into the mindset of organizers, of the people who scheduled this. Who the heck in their right mind thought that Amber Rose was a good kickoff person? I mean, what's the mindset behind that, Michael? Because it's not for Black people. Most white people don't know who she is. Who's the person in the meeting at the RNC who's like, who we want to make sure that we have? Amber Rose. How's that happen?
Well, so when that name comes up, I guarantee you most of the people in the room ask the question, who is Amber Rose? And so the reality there is, again, goes back to the cynicism. It's not real. It's not real. They don't give a rat's ass about us. They don't, people. Stop it. Don't tout out Tim Scott all day long. Tim, you knew you weren't going to be the VP, but you groveled. Grown-ass Black man telling a 77-year-old white man how much he loves him. Please. Stop it. Byron Donalds, yes, highly educated. Speaks so well. You are so articulate. I can't tell you, Byron, how many people in Republican rooms I've been in talk about you that way. He's so articulate. You know what that means, right? This cynicism is so real, and yet these folks move around in these circles because they want the proximity to the power. They want to be the one that everyone in the party turns to. And so that's a tension within that caucus. And the reality of it is you have those who are showboating and those who are trying to actually get the work done. And it's hard. It's hard. And it's not real. That's the thing. It's not real. And putting up Amber Rose is proof that it's not real. Donald Trump sat there and applauded this woman and smiled through the whole thing. And the reality of it is, for African Americans, as you said, looking at it, they went, well, that ain't us.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more on Black Republican leadership and the outreach of Black voters with Michael Steele. It's A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're talking with political analyst and former RNC chair Michael Steele about Black leadership and the Republican Party. I want to hit you with a theory that I have, Michael. So this is my perspective on what we've seen happen in the press and how it's affected sort of Democrats and even, here in the RNC. In my life, it has always seemed clear that the national mainstream press, your ABC, CBS, 24-hour cable networks, Times, Post, whatever, always sort of promoted the idea that the presidential race is competitive because that's what draws eyeballs. In 2016, at this point in 2016, Hillary was further ahead of Trump in 2016 than Trump is over Biden now, but all the press was still like, hey, this is a close race. This is a close race. In 2020, Biden was leading Trump by like 9 points at this point. And it was like, hey, it's a close race. It's a close race. In my perception, Michael, I have never, ever in my adult professional life seen a collective effort, it seems, on the part of so many mainstream press outlets to declare a race over in June. Is that just me, Michael, or have you seen that as well? And why do you think it's happening?
It's very simple. Donald Trump said it on his way out of the Oval Office in 2021. He said, you're going to miss me. And what he meant by that is you need me as much as I need you. I mean, this whole fake news thing for Donald Trump, remember, this is the same guy who would pretend to be a reporter to talk about himself to reporters or to other people. He would pretend to be someone else in his company to talk to reporters about what Donald Trump. That's why he talks about himself in the third person. He's so used to pretending to be outside of himself and sharing stories about himself in a way that he's not telling you, even though he's telling you. Someone else is telling you how great he is and what wonderful things he's done. And over the years, whether it's the New York market, now the national White House press corps, they love it. He's good for their business. I mean, look, I don't have to write or talk about Donald Trump every day. I really don't. But we take the same storyline and we talk about it every which way from Sunday, every single day. And we don't let any of it just rest. We're continuously layering on top of the story we just told, the same story told differently. Nothing's changed about the narrative in terms of its outcome or its impact. You would tell that story and then move on. But then you got to tell it again and then look at it from this angle, tell it again, look at it from that angle. And as much as anything else, he is entertaining. And our media, you're all about the entertaining. You've stopped telling the story. You've stopped sharing the facts. You've given up on, and that's what you heard Joe Biden complain about this week in his sit down with Lester Holt, when he was like, well, when Lester was like, you did this, you sounded like this on that debate stage. And he said, yeah, I had a bad night, but when were you going to report the 28 lies that he told in that hour, in that time? When were you going to tell that? And Lester was like, yes, we did. He was like, no, you did not. And the president was right. No, they did not. They did not. Immediately after that debate, it was an onslaught, which was then made even worse by Democrats who came out and not only complained about the style of the debate, but then immediately went to, well, he's got to go. And meanwhile, Donald Trump, who sat there and lied about everything from having the greatest economy in the history of mankind to the 2020 election was stolen, no one was there in space refuting that. So, yeah, our press is culpable here. We know what they did in 2016. They gave the man $3 billion worth of free advertising. Whenever Donald Trump wanted to come on air, the first time in the history of Meet the Press, Donald Trump called in as a presidential candidate. He was allowed to do that. He was allowed, the press gave him the leeway to do things that no one else was ever allowed to do. And we're paying the consequences for it right now.
So here's something else that I'm seeing, and it has to do with, again, what we see with the RNC this week and the coverage of the Democratic Party, I would say, for the last 6 or 7 weeks. What I always tell people is, certainly in June, again, like you, after Labor Day, you got to start paying attention to the polls. June, July, it's iffy, and everything's so crazy right now. It's hard to really make an assessment. But I always say, you don't just pay attention to the polls. You look at what the campaigns actually do, because that's what reveals what their internal polling is saying, right? So, for example, Democrats are spending $1 billion in North Carolina. North Carolina has only gone for Democrats once in the last 40 years. It was Obama in 2008. No one else has ever won it. So I'm like, so if the Democrats are spending all that money in North Carolina, it means one of two things. Either they think that black gubernatorial candidate, the Republican, is so offensive that there's a chance that they could flip the state, that they could flip the state blue, or they're convinced that they've lost Arizona and Georgia, and this is a Hail Mary. It means one of those two things, but a lot of money is being spent there. In a similar way, Joe Biden has a terrible debate, and for 10 days, it's this feeding frenzy. But Michael, what I noticed is after 10 days, what were the Republicans doing? Trump was on Truth Social saying, I don't know anything about Project 2025. And what that says is that the Republicans' internal polling was like, yeah, people aren't talking about old Joe. They're learning about this Project 2025 thing. It's all over TikTok. It's all over Instagram. We got to cover that. It is clear that there is a groundswell on the part of voters who have policy issues with Trump. Am I the only person seeing this?
You are not. You are not. That is absolutely the truth right now. This election will not turn on Joe Biden's age. Republicans know that. They had that advantage, and the Democrats have been very good at sort of helping them press that advantage. Democrats trashed Kamala Harris and then found themselves in this awkward position 2.5 years later where suddenly they're now having to call for the president to step down. They go, oh, shit, that means Kamala Harris is going to be the presidential. Well, maybe Gavin Newsom. Oh, Gretchen Whitmer. Oh, wait a minute. You mean we still have a Kamala Harris problem? Oh, okay. That's where they find themselves, which is why they just need to shut the hell up. As I said the other day, gird your loins and get ready to go out there and mix it up, because that's what you're going to have to do. And where you're going to mix it up, Project 2025, abortion, IVF, Supreme Court, now creating an imperial presidency. I hope people realize now the real power, the real transformative power in this country is not in the executive branch, and it's not in the legislative branch. It is in the judiciary, which is why Roosevelt tried to pack the Supreme Court, which is why other presidents have changed the number on the court, because it was an extension. It was the ultimate extension of power. Here's the thing about Donald Trump and his world. Steve Miller, Steve Bannon, they all believe one thing: you can't stop us. And right now, on the heels of this shooting and on the heels of the internal circle firing squad on Joe Biden, that belief has hardened. They believe this election is over. They've won it. And you're seeing already, and we'll see more of, well, all the polls are showing we're winning. If we don't win in November, it's because you stole it. Based off polling in July, which is why I'm trying to help people understand, and you're trying to help people understand, polling in July means nothing. We can go back in recent history. We don't have to go back 20 years. We can go back one cycle into 2022 and see where the Republicans were leading going into the general election and lost because voters looked at ultimately and decided, who am I actually going to vote for? And said no to what MAGA was putting up. And so we need to be cognizant of that. This is more just than oh yeah, Joe Biden is old and Donald Trump he can't do everything he says he's going to do. We don't believe that's going to happen. Believe me, baby, it's going to happen. I mean, he tried 3 times to impose the Insurrection Act in his first term. What do you think is going to happen when he doesn't have people telling him no? Come on, wake the hell up, people. What do you think is going to happen?
What do you think is the likely impact of a convention in this flooded, highly polarized media environment? Once speeches are done and everything is said and everybody's said and done, because in the past, we've always talked about convention bumps, and we're at a point now where there's not even a bump for Trump since the shooting. The assassination attempt has had no impact. The debate didn't have an impact on Biden. It was Democratic infighting that has hurt Biden more than the debate itself. So in an environment where it doesn't seem like anything phases anybody, what do you think is going to be the legacy, polling or strategically, from this convention?
I think one of the things that polling, pollsters, political pundits, podcasters who are out there sort of spewing off all kinds of crazy stuff about what this is versus what it isn't, continue to underestimate the one thing that's central that I really put my hat on, and which is the key data point, is that the American people have baked in a lot already about these two men, and have even those undecideds have made up their minds about these two men, right? The only question left for them is, who are they actually going to vote for? That's it. They've baked in Joe Biden's age. We've been watching Joe Biden since 1973, for God's sake. Don't come to me and act like a Bidenism, a gaffe by Joe Biden is something new, right? This is who the man is. When he was in his 40s, he was saying crazy shit, right? So yeah, in his 80s, he's going to say some crazy stuff out there. Donald Trump is the same thing. We know Donald Trump is basically a failed businessman who largely got his success by putting his name on other people's businesses. The reality of it is people have baked all of that in, Jason. So this election now boils down to coming out of not just the Republican convention, but the Democratic convention as well in a few weeks. Did it move anybody's needle in terms of what they want January 22nd, 2025 to start to look like? February, April of 2025, what they think is going to happen in this country. In one instance, you have a president currently serving, old, sometimes slurs his words because of his stutter, has a funny gait because of a broken foot and neuropathy in one leg. I suffer from neuropathy. I know that feeling. It does affect the way you walk because sometimes you don't feel your entire foot, right? But you power through. Who has said some things, mixed up, forgotten names. But the idea of whether or not he can do the job is stupid because he's doing the job. With Donald Trump, who did the job, you now have a basis of understanding how he did the job. And he created an environment in our country in which wearing a mask became a political discussion. He spent $8 trillion, which Nikki Haley reminded us during the campaign, hobbled the nation. So you have a reference point already for all you folks who are trying to figure out how you're actually going to vote. There's no new information here for you, except for Project 2025, Dobbs, immunity by the Supreme Court, versus job creation, wages are increased, medicines like insulin are now capped and protected for those who have to use those medicines. Infrastructure, did I say infrastructure? You know the choices here, people. You're not learning anything new. The evidence is here in front of you. The question that you have to ask yourself is, who do you actually want to vote for?
Michael Steele is the former lieutenant governor of Maryland and former chair of the Republican National Committee. He's now a political analyst for MSNBC and host of The Weekend, along with Alicia Menendez and Simone Sanders, and the Michael Steele podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today on A Word.
My pleasure.
And that's A Word for this week. The show's email is aword@slate.com. This episode was produced by Kristie Taiwo-Makanjuola. Alicia Montgomery is the vice president of audio at Slate. Our theme music was produced by Don Will. I'm Jason Johnson. Tune in next week for A Word.